March 2026. Air New Zealand cancels 1,100 flights. 44,000 passengers stranded, rerouted, or left waiting. 2 weeks later, the airline does something almost unheard of in public markets. It withdraws its own financial forecasts. A projection published for investors, weeks in the making, already obsolete. CEO Nikhil Ravashankar was direct. There is a limit to how much of this cost can be passed on to passengers. He didn't blame a mechanical failure. He didn't cite a labor dispute. He pointed, implicitly, to a conflict happening 15,000 kilometers from Auckland.
Aviate has reached 20,000 subscribers passionate about aviation. Our sincere thanks for your support. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.
New Zealand sits at the southern edge of the Pacific. 5 million people on 2 islands, with no border with any country, no way out except by sea or by air. For New Zealanders, flying isn't a transport option. It's the only option to reach Sydney or Tokyo. If you need to leave, you board a plane. Air New Zealand built its entire identity around that reality. Long-haul routes connecting Auckland to Los Angeles, New York, London, Singapore, Tokyo. A fleet centered on the Boeing 787-9, designed specifically for ultra-long-haul flying with lower fuel consumption than anything that came before it. The airline competed on reach, the ability to connect one of the most isolated nations on the planet to every major commercial center in the world. And the same isolation that created the challenge created the advantage. The passengers it served had nowhere else to go. What nobody asked was this: what if the fuel equation changed? In 2022, New Zealand closed Marsden Point, its last oil refinery, converted it into a fuel import terminal. The justification was economic. Maintaining a small refinery in a small market no longer made sense against the cost of importing refined products from Asia and Australia. The numbers made sense. The risk seemed remote. From that moment on, every liter of aviation fuel used in the country would arrive by ship. No local alternative, no backup plan, no ability to produce a single barrel on home soil. The decision to close Marsden Point was not made out of incompetence. It was made with impeccable logic within a framework of stability that nobody expected to end. The board members and government officials who signed off on that transition were not wrong about the economics of refining, but they made an efficiency decision at a moment when the world appeared stable, and efficiency, by definition, eliminates redundancy. It eliminates backups. It eliminates exactly the kind of capacity that only has value when something goes wrong. The vulnerability always existed, structurally. The closure of Marsden Point made it permanent. The crisis didn't announce itself with a single event. It assembled itself piece by piece. The first component was the crack spread. Aviation fuel isn't priced simply by crude oil. The price has 2 layers: the cost of crude oil itself and the refining margin, known as the crack spread, which reflects the cost of transforming crude oil into finished aviation fuel. Air New Zealand had hedged 83% of its crude oil exposure for the second half of 2026. On paper, that looked like responsible risk management. In practice, it meant the airline was protected against the portion of the cost it had locked in, and completely exposed to the portion it hadn't. Before the conflict escalated, the crack spread was approximately $22 per barrel. Within days, it surged to more than $115, an increase of over 400%. The hedge, carefully constructed, covered crude oil. The refining margin moved entirely outside it. What that number means in concrete terms: the airline had projected consuming approximately 2.9 million barrels of fuel between March and June 2026. The difference between a crack spread of $22 and one of $115 across that volume is approximately $270 million in unbudgeted cost in 4 months. No model had priced this in. No forecast had prepared investors for it. No hedge had touched it. When Ravi Shankar stood before the cameras to explain the cancellations, every financial projection the airline had published weeks earlier was no longer reliable. There is a detail here that captures the trap with precision. Air New Zealand's most profitable routes, Auckland, New York, Auckland, Los Angeles, Auckland, London, are also the routes that consume the most fuel. A 7879 burns approximately 5,400 kilograms of fuel per hour. The Auckland-New York flight takes around 17 hours. A single flight carries almost 100 tons of fuel. On the routes that generate the most revenue, the cost exposure was greatest. The airline's strength and its vulnerability were the same asset. Meanwhile, the cancellations themselves amplified the damage. Cutting capacity to manage fuel costs meant less revenue, which meant less ability to absorb the costs that remained. The spiral closed, and Air New Zealand had to make a decision. The fuel shock explains the cancellations. It doesn't explain why Air New Zealand suffers more than any other airline in the world. Consider the following. The Emirates Group operates from Dubai, adjacent to the world's largest concentration of refining capacity. Its fuel costs are structurally different from any island-based carrier, not because Emirates is better managed, but because of where Dubai sits in relation to global energy infrastructure. Qatar Airways enjoys similar proximity. Lufthansa and Ryanair operate on a continent with multiple competing refiners, diversified supply chains, and the ability to refuel at dozens of facilities within short ground distances. American carriers fly over a country with refineries in virtually every major producing state. Air New Zealand operates from a country with 0 refineries, supplied by tanker ships that take weeks to arrive from Asian and Australian refineries. When the crack spread moved, every major airline faced a version of the same headwind. Air New Zealand faced it without shock absorbers, and the airline's immediate response reveals with surgical precision exactly where the vulnerabilities lie. The first decision was surgical: cut where it hurts least. Air New Zealand didn't cancel routes, it cut frequencies, specifically off-peak flights, lower demand time slots, regional connections where same-day alternatives existed. Tauranga lost 31 rotations to Auckland, Wellington lost 28. In total, 5% of the operational network, 1,100 flights between March 16th and May 3rd, was eliminated. The deliberate choice to cut domestic rather than international was not accidental. It was a financial survival decision. The New Zealand government activated its National Fuel Plan for 2026 and moved to temporarily align the country's fuel specifications with Australia's, an emergency measure designed to expand access to alternative suppliers. These are the actions of a government that understands it is managing a structural fragility, not a temporary inconvenience. Air New Zealand kept its 777 flying on American routes, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and confirmed that the 7 aircraft of that model will remain in the fleet. The rationale is simple and rational. Grounding those routes and parking those aircraft, even accounting for the 777's higher fuel burn compared to the 787-9, would be worse than operating them at elevated cost, particularly because demand from American passengers rerouting to avoid the Middle East is keeping load factors high. A 777 at 90% occupancy still generates revenue. On fares, the increases were felt immediately. Domestic tickets rose $10 one way, short-haul international $20, long-haul $90, on an Auckland-New York ticket that already costs several $1,000s. Small numbers in absolute terms, but the CEO was explicit. There is a limit to how much can be passed on before demand collapses. An airline that raises prices beyond what a captive market can absorb risks emptying its planes. And a 777 flying half full while burning 8 tons of fuel per hour is an existential problem. Air New Zealand didn't build the wrong airline. It built exactly the right airline for the country it serves. What it couldn't build, because no airline can, was immunity to the physical and economic conditions of the place it operates from. Geography doesn't care about hedging strategy. There is a tendency, when an airline cancels 1,000 flights and withdraws its forecasts, to look for the mistake. The blame falls on the CEO. The strategy was wrong, the risk that should have been seen was not. The Air New Zealand crisis offers something more uncomfortable than a mistake. It offers a case study in the limits of rational decision-making when the environment is structurally hostile. Every individual choice in this story was defensible. Closing an uneconomic refinery, building a modern fleet, hedging crude oil exposure, serving the market you have. Together, those choices produced an airline with no refinery, long routes, partial hedging, and no alternative when the uncovered portion moved 400% in a single week. The lesson is not that Air New Zealand should have seen this coming. The lesson is that systemic vulnerability doesn't announce itself. It accumulates silently inside the logic of efficiency and presents its bill exactly during the kind of event that efficiency was never designed to survive. Islands have always known at some level that their isolation has a price. The invoice rarely arrives all at once.